Scott Ritter. How are you doing this morning, Scott?
I'm doing good, thanks. Yourself?
Uh, a lot more organized than before. But yeah, thank you so much for joining again. It's a very huge honor. So I just want to set the mood of the stream with a question that has gone over our minds in the past few weeks, at least once. Everyone who's listening has probably asked this question. Um, from Nord Stream to the bridge in Crimea to the retaliatory strikes over Kiev and the rest, I feel that we are at a very heated breaking point that is possibly even worse than, from my own observation at least, than 1962. Because at least with the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK and Khrushchev, they talked with one another and they made a negotiation and we got that okay. But in this case, the West is defiant, Zelensky's defiant, Putin's defiant. You get my point. So I ask you, Scott, and as many people have asked this question probably at least once, is there no turning back at this point, or is there a way out of here?
Well, we're nowhere near the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of threat to international peace and security. Keep in mind, at that time, the United States had Jupiter nuclear-armed missiles deployed in Turkey and in Italy. The ones in Turkey were just a few minutes flight time from striking, Nikita Khrushchev's the Black Sea dacha at Bitsunda, where he often went. This was unacceptable to the Russians, to the Soviets. They put nuclear armed SS 4 and SS 5 missiles into Cuba that were minutes away from striking American cities up and down the East Coast. That was unacceptable. We were at a real risk of nuclear war. JFK was intervening, was entertaining um, options presented to him by his senior most military advisors to launch preemptive attacks on Cuba. Um, None of that's happening today. None of that's happening today. We need to put everything into perspective. Russia is engaged in a war with Ukraine. I know they call it a special military operation. It's a war. There is no danger whatsoever of nuclear weapons being introduced into this mix. Russia has had some difficulties, but I think everybody who assesses the current situation with an open mind understands that the game is up. Uh, the war is over, except for the dying. Russia has won, and there's nothing NATO can do to stop it. NATO has a nuclear umbrella that is solely linked to a response to a nuclear attack by an outside party, in this case, Russia. If Russia doesn't launch a nuclear weapon against NATO, NATO will not use nuclear weapons against Russia. This is just a plain statement of fact. The United States does have an independent, um, you know, nuclear doctrine that operates separate from NATO, which does allow for preemptive nuclear strikes in given circumstances. Um, but none of the circumstances that emerge from the Ukraine crisis would be independent of a NATO context. Therefore, the United States will not, and frankly speaking, cannot use nuclear weapons preemptively against Russia in Ukraine. So let's just take nuclear weapons off the table. It's grossly irresponsible to have them brought up. I know people are going to say, well, Vladimir Putin started this. Vladimir Putin never used the word nuclear. Vladimir Putin talked about the totality of Russia's capabilities. And it was implied that that included nuclear. But what he was saying is if NATO were to intervene in a way that threatened the very survival of Russia, then Russia would use all the means at their disposal to protect themselves. That's a warning to NATO to keep their nose out of Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member, contrary to what its intentions are and what the desires are of NATO members. It is a de facto NATO proxy. We see that in terms of the manner in which its military has been reconstituted by NATO, equipped by NATO, trained by NATO, commanded veritably by NATO, provided NATO intelligence, NATO communications, NATO logistics. It's a NATO military. It's staffed with Ukrainians primarily. There is a significant non-Ukrainian presence, but for the most part, these are Ukrainians. But it's a NATO proxy army, and it's being defeated piecemeal as we speak. There's just literally no risk of nuclear conflict unless the rhetoric gets out of control and shapes perceptions in a dangerous way. Let me give you an example. When the Ukrainian president, panicking after the announcement by Russia of a partial mobilization and the initiation of a strategic air campaign against Ukrainian energy hub targets, declares that he wants NATO to launch a preemptive attack against Russia. The implication, of course, being nuclear, because he said the best way to prevent a Russian nuclear attack would be to carry out a preemptive attack by NATO. Well, first of all, Russia's not planning on nuking Ukraine. It's not in Russian doctrine. It just simply won't happen. But Zelensky is in the business not of telling the truth, but of hyping up misinformation in a manner which best facilitates the continued provision of Western support. So he's basically begged NATO to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. What does the NATO Secretary General do? He comes out and gives a speech in response to this. He says that a Russian victory over Ukraine is a defeat for NATO, directly linking in an almost existential manner the continued survival of NATO to the need to defeat Russia and Ukraine. And then he says, in that regard, NATO must continue to test its nuclear deterrence to make sure that nobody is confused about the resolve of NATO to defend itself. So NATO's existential survival is linked to the survival of Ukraine, the defeat of Russia, and to guarantee that, NATO is going to exercise its nuclear deterrent capability. And they are doing so as we speak. Operation Steadfast Noon is underway, and bases in the Netherlands, where the United States stores B-61 airdrop munitions that are going to be handed out to Dutch, German, Italian, other air forces who have nuclear capable aircraft that has passed the NATO standards. And they're practicing what? Dropping nuclear weapons on whom? Russia. This is very dangerous. This is very dangerous. And then we have Russia holding their own national strategic nuclear exercises. Grom, they call it, thunder. And this is a test that includes the testing of missiles. Now, they'll be armed with dummy warheads, hopefully flying in a trajectory that takes them away from Europe, not toward Europe. But nonetheless, we have two nations or two systems, military associations, one Russia, the other NATO, playing nuclear war games at a time when NATO at least has been urged to launch a preemptive nuclear strike and has indicated that its nuclear deterrence is a key to its survival, and its survival is linked to the defeat of Russia. This is the kind of irresponsible rhetoric. Now, fortunately, the Russians are very smart and very perceptive, and they know what happened after Stoltenberg spoke. He was brought to the table by Lloyd Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, like a chastised child, and compelled to basically back down and say that NATO has no intention of getting involved in Ukraine. There's not going to be boots on the ground, none of that. So the adults are coming in, but not all, because then we have the President of the United States in an off-the-cuff remark made at a fundraising dinner, saying that he's not seen it like this since the Cuban Missile Crisis. He wasn't an adult during the Cuban Missile Crisis, so he didn't see anything back then. But but we are close to nuclear Armageddon, and he used that term at a fundraiser. Why is the President of the United States talking about nuclear posture, potential nuclear conflict at a fundraiser? It's just grossly irresponsible. Again, rhetoric. We need to tone down the rhetoric. We need to rein in people with loose lips. You know, the old saying, loose lips sink ships. In this case, loose lips terminate the globe. Nuclear war is nothing to joke about. It's nothing to treat in a lighthearted manner. It is deadly serious, so deadly serious that the five acknowledged nuclear powers got together earlier this year and reiterated their long held stance that because nuclear wars cannot be won, they should never be fought. So if they're never going to be fought, then shut up, Stoltenberg. Shut up, Biden. Shut up, everybody who's talking about it, because it's not an option. It can't happen. I believe it won't happen. Hopefully, the one good thing out of this will be that, and we faced a similar situation like this in the 1980s. Unlike Biden in the 60s, I was an adult in the 80s, and I know exactly what was going on. The buildup of intermediate nuclear forces in Europe by the Soviet Union beginning in the 1970s with the deployment of the SS-20 road mobile missile with 3 nuclear warheads altered the balance of power, so much so that NATO begged the United States to deploy its own intermediate nuclear forces. There was a lot of unrest in Europe, anti-nuclear forces. The German government collapsed because of this, but eventually the United States did deploy the Pershing II missile and the ground-launched cruise missile. We had an exercise. It's funny, I mentioned military exercises called Able Archer 83.
Yep.
This was an exercise, a command post exercise that tested NATO nuclear release authority. The Soviets were monitoring this, and they actually believed that the United States and NATO were getting ready to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. They believed it so much that they put nuclear weapons on their own aircraft, put the SS-20 missile force on alert, and were prepared to go to war. One mistake, and the world would have ended. One mistake. When President Reagan was briefed about this in 1984, he said they couldn't. Why would they think we would do this? Do the Soviets really believe we would launch a preemptive nuclear strike? And the CIA responded, yes, they believe that. This was enough to drive Ronald Reagan away from his rhetoric of evil empire and towards a moment reached 4 years later in December of 1987, where he sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev and signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty to eliminate these missiles and eliminate that threat. Hopefully, we're getting to that moment where grown-ups are going to realize it's time to stop the rhetoric today, back away from the edge of the abyss, and sit down at the negotiating table to bring an end to this nuclear threat by once again embracing the notion of arms control that involves the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons.
I hope to God you're right. Because honestly, for the most part, we are controlled by, well, the people that are controlling them are sociopaths, I should say. And like I crossed my fingers 4 times, like everyone else who's watching here, the same. But thank you for the answer, and definitely exactly what I was looking for. But I want to transition into my next point, because of course we have a very big battle going up in regards to on the ground situation in Ukraine. So with embassies evacuating amongst other things, it seems that Kherson is looking like to be a really huge battle. With over the last time I checked, now keep in mind this is changing by the second, I think everyone knows this. There's about 60,000 troops on the front lines, and I think there's about an equal amount of Russians. But like I said, please correct me if there's anything updated for those in the chat. With a city of 500,000 people, and there's now dozens of thousands. I think it's the number I last checked was 60,000 have evacuated already, and the fact that there's now accusations of possible flooding of the whole city. What's going through my mind when looking at this, do you think we will see a Grozny style battle or situation? Because even General Armageddon, as he's been nicknamed, is saying that the whole situation is very tense. So I would like to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I mean, General Surovikin is 100% right. War is tense. Ask the soldier on the front line, man. How tense is it when you're out at any second? You can be blown up by an artillery shell, have your brain splattered by a bullet. It's tense, serious business, really, really serious business. So I wouldn't expect him to say anything else. We have a situation where the Ukrainians appear to be prepared to blow up a dam and flood um, the region around Kherson, including several heavily populated areas. Now, unlike the Ukrainians, and I don't mean this, this isn't propaganda, the Washington Post and Amnesty International, two outlets known for their anti Russian positions, have both reported that Ukraine habitually uses civilians as human shields, that they purposefully build defensive positions in urban areas where there are significant civilian populations, hoping that the Russians won't attack them because of the potential for civilian casualties, or if the Russians do attack, to exploit that for their propaganda purposes. Russia doesn't do that. Russia doesn't play that game. So imagine a general officer being told that a dam is about to be blown, could be blown, putting significant populations of civilian at risk, told that the Ukrainians are getting ready to launch a major offensive that could include deep artillery strikes against targets in the Kherson area where civilian populations are, taking it upon himself to evacuate those civilians from the war zone. That's what you do when you're a general who complies with international law. That's what's happening here. This isn't panic. This isn't the Russians going, oh my God, the civilians out, we're going to surrender. This is the Russians saying, you want to fight? We'll fight. You want to blow up a dam? Blow up the dam. But we're not going to let you harm the civilians. We're getting them out of harm's way so that what? We have room to maneuver. It's very difficult to talk about turning a crossroads into a cauldron, a fire cauldron, artillery and air, a trap, so to speak, if there's civilians in the village that intersects with that crossroad. You can't blow it up because you're going to kill the civilians. You remove the civilians, and it gives you tremendous latitude now to use the battlefield, use the terrain, use momentum to your advantage. Suck the Ukrainians in, bring them to those crossroads, cut them off and annihilate. And that's what we're seeing every morning. Read it. You've seen it. 2 battalions here, 2 companies there. The Russian line hasn't withdrawn an inch since this vaunted Ukrainian Kherson offensive. What has happened is the Ukrainians have suffered thousands more casualties, lost hundreds of more equipment, and it's going to continue that way. Kherson's not in danger of being lost. It's not going to be turned into Grozny. There will be some damage to buildings because Ukrainians are shelling them. They're trying to disrupt Russian logistics, Russian command and control, Russian troop buildup. That's war. But what Russia's done is taken the civilian equation out of it. There won't be Russian civilians dying because of what the Ukrainians are doing. That's responsible leadership. That's compliance with the international law. Will Russia ever get any credit for this? No, they don't care. They're not doing it to get credit. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Exactly, and that's what should be upheld foremost than anything else, is to do the right thing. Because honestly, what you were saying though about, I think, like, you can blow up the dam, but you cannot kill our civilians. It kind of reminded me of, I think something similar happened in Moscow, when Napoleon invaded the country. In that, like, yeah, you know what, you could take Moscow and all this other stuff, but you know what, we are going to still stand right here and we're going to stay defiant. It's definitely their mindset that has been passed down through generations and generations. The next thing I want to ask is in regards to the military operation, kind of picking up, if you remember at the end of our last interview, I asked in regards to Poland, Belarus, and such, but now that we know, since the last time we talked, it's really moved forward in regards to Belarus. And the one thing that's not really mentioned all that much, and I remember this, and I think you do too, Scott, is that right after when the special military operation was launched all the way back in late February, around the same time, I don't remember the exact date, but you know what I'm talking about, is that Belarus had a referendum in regards to waiving their nuke ban, if I recall. And I was thinking, like, okay, something is not, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but sometime they're going to be using this as a prepping up for something else. And now that we're seeing this kind of this, I think they're calling like a counterterrorism operation or something like that. I don't want to get the wrong words or anything. Do you think that they're going to probably? Oh, oops, sorry, I have a little reverb. Do you think that they're going to probably put nukes in the hands of Belarus as a security measure, along with this current operation? What do you think is the goal in the current operation that was launched between the joint forces of Russia and Belarus? Thank you.
Russia strictly adheres to the requirements under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Russia's just, tried to score some diplomatic points. It's fruitless to try and score diplomatic points against the United States or Western Europe because they just don't care about the rule of law. But Russia has pointed out that the current exercise, Steadfast Noon, um, it operates in a manner that um, allows weapons who are not, or nations who are not um, nuclear powers under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to have de facto possession of nuclear weapons. And they say this is a violation. I don't ever imagine a situation where Russia's trying to make a diplomatic point only to contradict it by doing something that would mirror that which they're um, condemning. Russia's not going to give Belarus nuclear weapons. Belarusian military will never have control of nuclear weapons. They're a non-nuclear power under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. What can happen is that Russian forces who are equipped with tactical nuclear weapons, for instance, Iskander, missile batteries, things of that nature, can come on Belarus soil and therefore forward project Russian nuclear capability in a manner which threatens a larger um, expanse of NATO. Um, this would be done if Russia and Belarus felt that Belarus was under threat of potential NATO action. Right now, Belarus is very concerned about potential moves by Poland into Western Ukraine. And these concerns are going to be exacerbated as Ukraine as a nation starts to devolve, to fracture, to fall apart. You can't survive too much longer as a nation with no electricity. Winter is coming, and they're not ready for it. And then on the Kherson front, they literally have poured all of their reserves into this fruitless offensive that's just slaughtering their troops. There's nothing left. There's nothing behind. There's nothing coming up. Um, you know, Russia will determine how best to put pressure, and I think the Russians are smart enough to know that you don't want something to break until you're ready to deal with consequences of it breaking. So I think we're going to be seeing a very measured but increasingly intense campaign of pressure, both on the political front, the economic front, and the military front, designed to get Ukraine to collapse at a time and at a set set of circumstances that is to Russia's advantage. But when that happens, um, the danger is that Poland might make a move on Western Ukraine as a preemptive move to secure their flanks, to deal with the security crisis that'll be brought on by tens of millions of refugees and things of that nature. The Belarus president Lukashenko has said that under no circumstances will he allow Poland to gain access to Western Ukraine. Why? Because it basically would put Belarus in a situation where they were surrounded on three sides by enemies, by NATO. Not going to happen. So I think what we're seeing with this buildup of military forces is the potential to give Belarus and Russia the ability to rapidly intervene in one of two directions. First of all, when you have 80,000 Russian troops and hundreds of thousands of Belarusian troops, Kiev is now in play. The Ukrainians know that. What's important about Kiev being in play is the Ukrainians have to now divert reserves they no longer have to defend the capital city. Um, the other thing is, if there is a time when there is an absolute political collapse, the Zelensky government crumbles, falls, he's assassinated, flees the country, whatever, and there's political chaos, uh, the Russians will be in a position to rapidly come in and install order, put in a new government. The other thing that these troops, so that's a constant pressure that exists as we speak. There's 80,000 Russian troops there, hundreds of tanks. They're ready to rock. And if the situation calls for it, it can make the move. But that's just something that happens just by being there. That's the influence they have on the battle. The other thing is, together with the Poles, they can now move down in Western Ukraine, secure Lvov, secure the border. Um, Now, that wouldn't be something you'd want them to do singularly by themselves. Probably that's something you'd want to have happen once the Russians stabilize the Kherson front, launch their own counteroffensive in the south that secures Mykolaiv, and then Odessa links up to Transnistria, and now can pivot north. And you have that north pivot meet the south pivot, secure the line, and what you've done is you've encircled the Kievan rump state, that which will remain of Ukraine. NATO can no longer supply it. Nothing will happen. It will capitulate. I think this is the direction we're heading in this conflict. I mean, in the meantime, Russia will continue to move to secure Lugansk and Donbass and Donetsk to create a buffer where Ukrainian artillery can't reach Russian territory. So you'll see continued pressure coming from the east, but the war-ending maneuvers are more than likely going to be that which secures Odessa and then comes down and secures the border, linking NATO with Ukraine. And this is what the Belarusian president has pretty much committed to. He is not committed to be a part of the special military operation. He said that from day one. He said his job is to prevent NATO from stabbing Russia in the back. And any potential move by Poland into Western Ukraine is doing just that, stabbing Russia in the back. Any saber rattling by the Baltic republics is stabbing Russia in the back. Any move against Kaliningrad is stabbing Russia in the back. Belarus is there to help their Russian allies in any way they can to prevent all of that from happening. As we speak, there's tens of thousands of Polish soldiers already in Ukraine. They're wearing Ukrainian uniforms. They are organized as part of this proxy military. But Belarus and Russia both know that at any moment they can rip off the Ukrainian flags, put on the Polish flags, and become Polish soldiers who now have they've pretty much a fait accompli from their point of view. Poland is now in Western Ukraine. That will be allowed to last for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then the Russians and the Belarusians are going to come in and they're going to end the Polish presence. Problem with the Poles is that they are operating under some sort of misguided belief that NATO will back them up. But Russia killing Polish soldiers on Ukrainian soil does not enact Article 5, the self-defense clause, the collective defense clause of the NATO Charter. So Poland will be left hanging. Again, these are all dangerous situations, but none of them rise to the level of required nuclear weapons to be used either by Russia or by NATO. Belarus will never possess a nuclear weapon. Russian nuclear power may be projected into Belarus as part of the overall muscle flexing that's taking place. But no, Belarus is not going to invade Ukraine on its own volition. There will have to be a set, given circumstances that would trigger any deployment of Belarusian forces on Ukrainian soil.
All right, thank you. But carrying the theme of missiles, weapons, and just geopolitical situation as a whole, as we know, there's been a lot of talk in regards to Iran, and especially the past few days, because we've been seeing a lot of the drone strikes on Kiev, so there's a lot of finger pointing going on. So it seems like in general, though, for the past month or two, they've been pushing a lot with protests in Iran, and a lot of it is obvious, like color revolution garbage. We all know this is nothing new with Iran. This has happened ever since the revolution in '79 started. But Do you think there's a connection between like this and the fact that well, Russia's getting well, I don't know. Can you please confirm this for me? Is it confirmed that they are receiving missiles from Iran, or is that just a rumor?
Well, I don't think that they've actually received missiles.
Okay.
That's a story that's being put out, but they have
Mm-hmm.
received drones.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether they've received completed drones or whether they receive drone kits that will be assembled in Russia, um, we don't know. We do know that the Russian defense industry is gearing up to um, produce these Shahid 136 Geranium 2 drones
Yes.
as a purely Russian system in the future. But the drones that are being used right now, um, the Ukrainians have examined some of the debris, and even though the components are commercially available from around the world, one of the great ironies that the Iranians have used the West's own technology to build a weapon that is impervious to Western intervention. They have found some Farsi writing on it. So this is the same model that the Iranians use in Yemen, where they provide kits that are shipped into Yemen and then assembled by the Yemeni military and then used. Um, I think that the Iranians provided Russia with a significant number of these kits. These kits have been assembled in Russian defense industry installations, painted Russian colors, labeled with Russian numbers and names, and then used against Ukrainians with great effect. If I could say something about the drones real quick,
Yeah, sure thing.
Russia has its own drones. It's not like Russia didn't have drones. They have I think it's the Orlan 10. It's a surveillance drone that's capable of launching weaponry. A very effective drone. They have a variety of so-called kamikaze loiter drones. Most notably, something called the Lancet, which is produced by the Kalashnikov group out of Izhevsk. They have modifications of the Orlan to do SIGINT work. But Russian drone technology was intended to be employed in support of Russian military doctrine, which does not promote static operations. Russian military doctrine is based on dynamic maneuver, both in the offense and in the defense, to absorb attack and then counterattack. The Russians don't like to dig in and just sit there. So their drones didn't exist in the numbers, and indeed in terms of the capabilities that were needed by this. Russia was burning through its stock of Lancet missiles, um, and I think the Russians realized sometime in the summer that why do we need to use this highly capable kamikaze drone to take out targets that the cost benefit analysis just isn't there. Um, why don't we go to Iran, who has this technology, and see if we can acquire it? And they did so. It's a smart move, and they've acquired several different uh, kinds of drones that are cheaper than what it cost the Russians to build their own equivalents. Um, they're available and they're deadly. They're deadly, and the Russians have incorporated these weapons. And look what they're doing. Instead of firing $1 million caliber missile, I don't think it costs a million, a couple $100,000. They're firing a $12,000 Geranium 2. They're launching it. They're taking out the totality of Ukraine's energy infrastructure using little moped weapons. So
Mm-hmm.
the Russian adoption of this drone technology is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of Russia's ability to adapt and overcome, to not get trapped by doctrine in a military situation that's non-doctrinal in nature. And they're winning. I mean, they've crushed the Ukrainians. NATO doesn't have. Look at the shock of NATO as the realization of what the Russians were doing to the Ukrainian energy hub hit home. NATO held an emergency meeting. Why? because every single one of them realized there before the grace of God go us, if we ever were to go to war with Russia, they would shut down the electrical grid of Europe, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. We have no air defense. We have no integrated European air defense. So they're talking about building that. At the same time, they're talking about providing air defense to Ukraine. But now you wanted to talk about Iran.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to interrupt, but oh my God, sorry, I just heard all that reverb. I was going to say to the point, well, with the Shahed drones, the fact that those cost about $20,000 a pop. If I was in the Ukrainian military, I would feel absolutely embarrassed. The fact that this is shooting down like $5-10 million fighter jets, hitting energy infrastructure, and they're buying these for basically pennies. But to tie it all in with the drones, with them receiving the drones and possibly these missiles, do you think this is all tied in with the fact that, like, Iran's possibly looking to do something with Azerbaijan, the protests, and the weapons being sent? Because looking at these missiles, if these are going towards Russia, they look like they can go from Crimea to Kiev in just like a very short amount of time. They can go from Kherson to Lviv. And honestly, I think if they get those missiles, like any long range missiles, and before the Ukrainians do, I think this war is pretty much over in that regards because they have no air defense. Like they're handing out instruction manuals to civilians with AK-47s to shoot down these drones, which will bounce off like throwing candy at your chest. Like it's absolutely ineffective. But do you think this is all kind of interconnected with one another? So yeah, sorry, that was kind of the main point of the question I was trying to get at. But yeah, I would like to know your thought.
Again, if the Russians make a determination that the that they need to do X, but they lack the military capacity to do it, then they will acquire Y to get it done. Um, you know, Russia always has to keep in the back of its mind that there are other potential military contingencies that could erupt. What happens if Romania comes into Moldova, makes a move on Transnistria? Um, Russia would have to launch a campaign, and because they don't have troops in the immediate area, this campaign would have to be a air-based campaign, which means the weapons that they're expending right now on Ukrainian energy hubs um, would need to be diverted. What happens if the Baltic states, especially Lithuania, decide to isolate Kaliningrad? Um, there would have to be a campaign. And again, while Kaliningrad has its own military capacity, it would be isolated if Lithuania decided to do that. And so there would have to be an intervention. It would probably be primarily aerial based, meaning these precision strike, air launched, ground, sea launched missiles would have to be used there. So Russia, because these are real world contingencies, they have to make sure they have the capacity to carry out these contingencies. So they can't strip away all of their resources to support this campaign, the strategic air campaign in Ukraine. They need to maintain that. What happens if Japan makes a move on the Kuril Islands? What happens if there's a conflict over North Korea? What happens if the West makes a move on in the Arctic? Russia has to have military capacity to respond to this. So they can't strip away the totality of their long-range precision strike munitions just for Ukraine. But Ukraine is a pressing issue. So it would make sense that Russia seek to find available alternatives to Russian precision guided munitions that can accomplish the task in Ukraine. You don't need to fire Kinzhal missiles against Ukraine right now. The Kinzhal is a missile that you would use against a place that's heavily defended with advanced air defense. Don't fire Kinzhal where you can accomplish it with a Geranium 2. You don't need to use a Caliber cruise missile when the Geranium 2 can also accomplish that. And if the Geranium 2 can't, let's say that the Ukrainians finally find the air defense solution to it. If you want to preserve your Caliber force, then it would make sense to procure combat ready missiles, combat tested missiles from Iran that can accomplish the same task, but allow you to keep your indigenous capabilities for other potential contingencies. So I see that is what's going on here. I see that's what's shaping this. Um, Iran is, by providing these weapons, is making a statement that they are pivoting to the east, to Russia, to China. That the day of Iran trying to do that which the West finds to be acceptable is over, finished. Um, does this mean Iran is trying to use their support for Russia to somehow empower them to make a move on Azerbaijan? No. I mean, first of all, the roots of any potential Iranian Azerbaijani conflict are separate from Ukraine. There's no cause and effect relationship there. Second of all, Iran doesn't want a war with Azerbaijan. They're not seeking one. They would do everything to avoid this conflict as opposed to try and deliberately set themselves up to fight this. Iran doesn't carry out uh, you know, offensive attacks against its neighbors. That's not in their DNA. Um, so what I do think is that by helping Russia and pivoting towards China, as they've done by joining, um, BRICS, and by becoming a member in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, um, Iran is basically aligning itself, realigning itself geopolitically to the east. Um, and helping Russia is what you do if you're allies, if you're friends, and they're doing other things on the energy front. They're receiving Russian gas that they're plugging into the northern Iranian economy, and then they're freeing up gas that they're producing in the south to be exported as Russian gas. So they're giving Russia another outlet to global markets. Um, and I think we're going to see increased cooperation of this nature, and this cooperation with the drones and potential cooperation with the missiles is just part and parcel of this overall new relationship that Iran has with Russia, China, and Trans-Eurasia.
Uh, well, one thing I think you can agree on, and a lot of people within the chat can agree on, is that this is kind of the West's own doing because they are kind of boxing them into a corner, especially now we've seen with Taiwan. We've tried to see even with like Kosovo and all this such, because I think what they're trying to do is that they're kind of creating this multipolar world order, even though they're trying to prevent it all the time. But of course, what we've seen from even the sanctions and such, it's just blowing up in their face. And I think they need to wake up to reality. If not, I think we're going to see very dire consequences. But like I said, I do fingers crossed and everything that hopefully will come out of this okay. But uh, the next thing I want to bring up is actually, I'm hopefully you can see this, Scott. I'm going to try to share the screen here. Here we go. You can see the, Scott?
I see a photograph. Yep.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you in regards to like Stefan Bandera and the Banderites. Are you familiar with the name Christia Freeland at all?
Yes.
Due to the fact that her grandfather actually openly collaborated with the Nazis and has actually gone on Twitter saying that she is proud of her father's legacy, so by definition, she is a literal Nazi sympathizer. This is a great article from the Canada Files by a great writer named Aidan Jonah. Definitely check it out when you can. But like recently, we just had a pro-Ukraine rally where I live here in Vancouver, and like a lot of these people, just keep in mind, one day after, actually, I think it was on Sunday, which was one day after the 63rd anniversary of the KGB assassinating Stefan Bandera, they had this rally where people like openly carrying red and black flags in the street, so forth and so forth. And it just kind of boggles my mind because why this is of relevance. Because, well, first of all, she's the deputy prime minister of our country. She's the second in command. Second of all, she may be even eyeing to replace Stoltenberg to be NATO Secretary General. And even recently, in an interview she did with, I think she was doing like a question and answer thing with somebody who is from an African nation asking about, oh, what are you doing in regards to Russia and China moving towards Africa, so forth and so forth. And basically, she said, "Well, what I feel that with liberal democracies, you had to defend them in like to your death. Like basically, through the West's eyes, they want to fight until like the last of themselves. You know, kind of like the whole idea of the last Ukrainian." So my point being, though, um, this ideology that kind of got exported towards over after the Second World War, and especially due to the fact that the Soviets were trying to basically get rid of the Banderite faction throughout Ukraine when they reconquered it. I have to ask you, uh, how did this all kind of start? Like, what was the origins of like the Ukrainian army? Like, what was the CIA's activities in regards to the Banderites after World War II? Because we know that is very evident in that regards of the of what happened there. So I'm curious, what's the big fascination with the Banderites and their cooperation with the West? So
Well, I mean, good question. Yeah, point out this isn't solely a Canadian problem.
oh,
Um,
yeah, because in
about
New York, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was going to say because in New York there is that's where a lot of those people immigrated, refugees, so forth and so forth. That like the same lobby kind of was in that power. Sorry, go on. My apologies. I'll shut up.
in Ellenville, in New York, they have a park where they have the statues of four um, Bandera, including Stepan Bandera. It's the field of honor, and every summer the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists -B for Bandera, um, and their ilk, their progeny, gather, hold summer camps where they indoctrinate children. They have torchlight parades where the kids wear brown uniforms that are cut the same model and design of SS stormtroopers. That's here in the United States. We have people like Alexander Vindman and Victoria Nuland who can all trace their, um, these are Ukrainian Americans who trace their uh, Ukrainian identity to Stepan Bandera. They're unapologetic. We have people like Gary Tabak, a retired Navy captain who actively, travels to Ukraine, actively collaborates with the right sector. He brags about being with the right sector in Odessa in May of 2014. We know what the right sector did in Odessa in May of 2014, burning 84 ethnic Russians to death in a building they set on fire after jamming 150 ethnic Russians into the building,
I'm
cheering as
sorry to interrupt here, Scott, but I wanted to add on that. It was even revealed by the CBC out of all the news sources that the Canadian government, when that was going on, they actually gave them shelter when that massacre was happening. So, like, the Canadian government is very aware of everything that has happened with the ethnic cleansing of Russians, and it's absolutely terrible in that regard. So I'm sorry, I just thought I'd add on top of that because it just like I said, I don't understand the coziness of it. So
well, I don't understand either. I mean, Gary Tabak does a webcast, and I'm not trying to promote this guy. I'm just trying to expose him as the kind of, disgusting fraud. Well, there's nothing fraud. I mean, I'll give him credit. He's honest. But in the background, he posts on his wall all the weapons that were part of the Bandera movement in the 1940s and 50s, weapons of resistance. Then he has the American flag over which he drapes the right sector flag. So clearly his loyalties are to the right sector. He puts it prominent to the American flag, the flag of the government he allegedly served for so long. But my point is, in the United States, this is taken as normal, acceptable. It's acceptable behavior to actively promote the memory of Stepan Bandera, who is literally one of the most despicable, vile, disgusting characters in modern history. He's up there with the worst of the Nazis. Not only did his men, um, working at the behest of the Germans, pull the triggers on the weapons that killed 30 to 40,000 Jews at Babi Yar, um, but his organization was responsible for ethnic cleansing of Poles and Russians in territories that he believed should be exclusively the purview of Ukrainians killing hundreds of thousands of Poles, hundreds of thousands of Russians. And I'm not talking about in combat, closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower and maneuver. I'm talking about surrounding a village and taking the women, the children, the elderly out into a field and slaughtering them. This is a pig of a man. His memory should not be, exalted. His grave should be dug up. His body should be burned. His ashes scattered around the world so his memory would never exist. That's what he deserves. But instead, people elevate him and worship him. We have a statue to him right here in my country that disturbs me to no end. How did this come about? When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, we know that the many Ukrainians welcomed them with open arms, especially in Western Ukraine. Um, the Germans went so far as to consider many in Western Ukraine to be fellow Aryans. In fact, thousands of Ukrainian children, blonde haired, blue eyed Ukrainian children, were taken to Germany to be incorporated into the genetic pool of the sick Nazi fantasy of creating the Superman. Um, Stepan Bandera was, of course, not blonde hair and blue eyed, but he bought into this notion. He aligned himself with Nazi Germany early on. His promotion of an independent Ukraine got him in trouble, and he was put into under arrest. But it wasn't the kind of arrest that one normally associates with the Nazis. It was a sort of a glorified house arrest. He was not under any pressure. He was allowed to communicate, receive guests, etc. And eventually he was released. But his organization of Ukrainian nationalists actively fought with the Germans, again, oppressing Jews, killing Poles. And then later, when the Soviet Union launched its counterattack and drove Germany out, they were involved in killing Soviet soldiers and then Russian civilians. The Germans had an intelligence organization in the West. It was run by a guy named General Galen, and as the Germans withdrew, the Galen organization organized stay behind intelligence capability, and the Bandera organization was one of these. They basically were directed by Nazi Germany up until the very end of the war, using German weapons, German ammunition, German stocks left behind for that purpose, receiving instructions from the Germans, reporting intelligence back to the Germans. When the war ended, the Galen organization, instead of being disbanded and having Galen and his ilk brought up, tried, put up against the wall, and shot, instead the United States said, no, keep your whole organization together. Don't lose the thing. Come here and work for us. Initially for the OSS, later for the CIA. And so all of this human intelligence network that the Galen organization was running in the former occupied territories of the Soviet Union, Poland, elsewhere, were taken over by the CIA. As far as the Ukrainian nationalists were concerned, from 1945 until around 1954, they were engaged in active resistance against the Soviets. This was bloody. Over 200,000 Ukrainians died because of this fighting. I think the number of around 36 to 40,000 Soviet troops died as well. This was big time fighting. Remember, I talked about a decade. In Vietnam, America lost, 58,000 troops. And we consider that decade of Vietnam to be, some pretty intense fighting. So it tells you what the level of intensity of the conflict was that could kill 40,000 Soviet troops and hundreds of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian civilians. So this isn't some low-level insurgency. This is major league fighting with organized bands in the woods, attacking villages, attacking outposts, etc. But eventually the Soviets got the upper hand and defeated them. And that led to a massive withdrawal of anti-Soviet Western Ukrainians to the West, and they resettled. This diaspora resettled in Canada, the United States, throughout Europe, in Germany, and they were directed by Stepan Bandera, who went to Germany. and coordinated with the Galen organization and the CIA to continue using the stay behind elements to gather intelligence. Um, the CIA, the United States, provided funding for these stay behind Banderists in Ukraine, in the Soviet Union, up until 1990. The last funding was cut off in 1990, not because we said, "Oh, we've given up on these guys," but because we said we won. Ukraine's about to become independent. We victory. But we maintained the relationships not only directly between the CIA and the Ukrainians, but by proxy with all of these CIA-controlled West Ukrainian diaspora um, communities throughout the world, in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere. The connectivity between this diaspora and the U.S. government towards a unified policy objective in Ukraine has always been there. So when in 2014, as the Maidan demonstrations were taking place, the demonstrations began in 2013 when Viktor Yanukovych decided that he wasn't going to pivot to the European Union. He was going to stay on track with economic cooperation with Moscow. There were peaceful demonstrations. That's fine. The United States decided to weaponize this this relationship they had with the organization of Ukrainian nationalists dash Bandera. They were they had morphed into things we called the right sector political parties, Sloboda, I think C14 or C19. Um, Organizations of this nature, we weaponized. We helped them gain access to weapons from police arsenals. Um, and then they moved into Kiev and they carried out a violent coup d'etat, killing hundreds of people, but evicting Viktor Yanukovych and putting in place a handpicked American government. Um, Now, these guys were a political minority in Ukraine, but they themselves brag about how they used violence to maximize their influence, that nothing happened in this new government unless the Banderists wanted it to happen. And then they began their campaign of rape, murder, um, you know, veritable genocide, cultural genocide against the Russians that have led us to where we are today. But that's the relationship, and they're everywhere. Victoria Nuland went to these camps we talk about. I can't say that Alexander Vindeman did, but Vindeman might as well take down the American flag and put up the right sector flag because he is a dyed in the wool Ukrainian nationalist. And people say, well, but he's Jewish. So is Zelensky. I think so is Newland. But it doesn't stop these people from buying into this because it's they turned a blind eye to the historical roots of the Bandera movement, and instead they buy into this as anti-Russian. This is more about hating Russians than it is about resenting the fact that Bandera slaughtered tens of thousands of Jews during World War II.
I'm just having all the images of like when I was there on Sunday, just like I said, seeing the red and black flags, and I explained to people, and actually the worst thing was they had a bunch of kids up on top, like they're obviously indoctrinated because how the UCC, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, they like have like the youth camp program, but it's more of like a Hitler youth camp program,
Yeah.
and it just made me sick. Because the thing is, I actually confronted one of the guys because they actually had like a red and black Banderite flag on the stage. Not only just one, but two. But when I actually confronted the guy, I have a video of this on my channel for anybody who wants to see. I went up to him. I just said, "Hey, what's this flag about? What's this?" I just have a casual interview with him because a lot of people don't understand. You don't call these people names. If you want to expose these people, you just let them talk. It's very simple. And that's what I did. And long story short, he just said, well, when it comes to Volm, like this is just a continuation of the struggle between the Ukrainians after the First World War and the Poles. Like, they annexed Western Ukraine. But then, like, originally, some of the Ukrainians wanted to work for the Germans and they said, screw this. He doesn't mention the part about how that's actually how the Banderites formed. But the point is that at the end of it, he said, "Well, I don't know what the numbers were, but regardless of whether it was justified or not in regards to volume, it doesn't matter." And they let these people just walk openly with their red and black flags walking about. But it's interesting, as soon as I did this and I posted this video, when I went to that rally on Sunday, because keep in mind, when I talked to that guy, what I just explained there was all the way back in March. When I went to the recent rally on Sunday, which is, like I said, is funny because this is one day after Stefan Bandera was assassinated by the KGB. I thought he would be there. He wasn't, but his wife was. And his wife did not put those flags up on stage. These people know who they are. And it comes to my point with the kids, they're obviously indoctrinated. A lot of the people with the yellow and blue flags, keep in mind, I have Ukrainian heritage. So going over this for the past year has been sickening to me. It's been difficult. But my point is that a lot of these people are, not to be rude, but they're low information. They wake up, they go to their job, they check out the news, they go to sleep, they have their food, repeat. They don't know too much like what we're having right now, but this is what I do, and why Scott does what he does. The point being, though, the people though that carry with the red and black flag, they know what they stand for, and those people, to me, in my opinion, pardon my language, Scott, they're pieces of shit. And and our media purposely, like I said, towards this rally, purposely left out these flags being mentioned or wherever they are. They cut them out. You see them out in all the footage and the videos. That's why if nobody else is going to do it, like I will. And that's the risk I take in doing what I do. But yeah, thank you though for bringing your information on top of that, Scott. But yeah, it makes me sad. So I would like to actually transition in towards a more personal point, a little
Can I
bit.
can I
Yes,
can
sorry.
I can I
Yes, sorry.
just say
Sorry.
one
Sorry.
thing on this because I think it's an important it's an
Yeah.
important point.
Mm-hmm. Sure
Um,
thing.
the Ukrainians have launched a number of actions. We'll just focus on one right now: is the assassination, the attempted assassination of Alexander Dugin, which resulted in the death of his daughter Daria Dugina,
Yes.
both of whom were on this Mirotvorets assassination list. I'm on that list. I don't know if you are, um,
Yet.
but the thing is, it isn't about saying, "Oh, woe is me" on that list. It's saying that this was such an egregious act that even the CIA uh, was compelled to contact the New York Times, which does not have a history of running pieces sympathetic to Russia or in opposition to Ukraine, where the CIA said, "We know that this was carried out by the Ukrainian intelligence services, and we know that they received orders from the Zelensky government." So reflect on that for a second. The assassination of Daria Dugina was an act of terrorism. There's no other way to describe it. She wasn't a combatant. She wasn't in the chain of command. She had no role in the military. She was a journalist. And if you disagree with her point of view, that doesn't mean that you get to sentence her to death. But she was sentenced to death because of who she was and what she was saying. It was an act of terrorism, which means that the Ukrainian intelligence service is a terrorist organization and the Ukrainian government of Zelensky is a state sponsor of terrorism. I'm not making this up. CIA has all but said it, but nowhere in the New York Times will you see the word terrorism, state sponsor of terrorist organization. But it's there legally. It's there. Now, having said that, what does that make Right Sector? It's an affiliate terrorist organization. What does it make Sloboda? An affiliate terrorist organization. What does it make every Canadian that marched in that thing? They are supporters of terrorism. Now, for a second, let's just remove Ukraine from the mix. And let's instead say ISIS or Al Qaeda. What would happen to Canadian citizens who decided they wanted to launch a parade in support of ISIS, in support of Al Qaeda, if they were organizing to raise money that they would send to ISIS or Al Qaeda, acknowledged terrorist organizations? I think the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would round them up, place them under arrest. The CIA would be monitoring them and perhaps even rendering them. In the United States, you would be arrested for providing material support to a terrorist organization. This is the hypocrisy, because it's not that we're speculating that the Ukrainian intelligence service or the Ukrainian government are terroristic in nature We know this. The CIA knows this. The US government knows this. The Canadian government knows this. Yet we know what they do to terrorists. We know what they've done in the past to ISIS supporters and Al Qaeda supporters, yet they turn a blind eye to acknowledge terrorist organizations operating on their soil. But because these people are white, they're blonde haired, blue eyed, we ignore it. It's not. These are terrorists in every way, shape, and form as anybody who supports ISIS and Al Qaeda is terrorists. They
No,
should be
I, I,
treated as.
I absolutely agree because that was the thing I said when the Kerch Bridge got, attacked. I said, no, this is an act of terrorism. Like, oh, if it's, a Muslim that does suicide bombing, which what it looks like, I'm 99.9% sure it was, and if the SBU is a part of it, it is an act of terrorism. But it's funny, like I said, if it's a Ukrainian, they're a hero. It's absolutely ridiculous in the fact that we put a double standard on this.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to say anything more to that, or?
No, that's just the point I'm trying to make. That
Yeah,
this isn't just about political differences. This isn't just about a disagreement in the interpretation of the relevance of history. I mean, look, I've seen that game played before. Here in the United States. And I don't want to go too far down this route, but Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves and had an illicit affair with a slave woman, and children were born. Therefore, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence and played a foundational role in the development of this country should be condemned because of the history. I'm not going to downplay anything Thomas Jefferson did. It all should be studied, but we should never forget that America is what it is today, largely because of what he did. So I understand the idea of saying what happened in the past is the past. But
yes.
Stepan Bandera is not that kind of guy. He's
That's
not
the
Thomas
thing.
Jefferson.
Sorry, but that's what makes me really disgusted about this is that I'll make this very brief. I had this exchange because, of course, Roger Waters, he's one of the few only people that is talking like the truth about this whole situation. And he's like, hey, how about we try to find an end to this conflict? And of course, he gets put on a kill list. He's seen as a Putin puppet, the whole 9 yards. And he actually got a concert canceled in Krakow because like they said he was a Putin puppet. They have no evidence whatsoever. The only thing I could find in regards to him being support of Putin in any way is that he shared an article that said, which was by Putin himself, saying like war is not a great thing. It should be a last resort. I think it was something on the lines of that. But that's the only thing I could find. Long story short was I went into the comment section of this post and I said, it kind of just blows my mind to see a bunch of Poles who are sucking up to this Ukrainian government that has figures within this government that worships a figure that ethnically cleansed over at least 100,000 of their own people. I don't understand. Like what I just said there was an objective. I didn't say anything subjective. I just point out the facts, and it's factual hypocrisy. And of course, this upset so many people. And the one response I got was from this one guy. He said, well, this is what's going on now, and so forth and so forth. Poles in the past have, their heroes have done bad things as well. But, Stefan Bandera as well, we're not all perfect people, but we're talking about right now. We have never forgotten Volm. And it's either if you're serious about this or you're a troll, you should go fuck yourself. I apologize for the language, but the one thing I've noticed, like even we've seen with like Elon Musk, like being super rational, calling for peace, and I agreed with like almost everything he said in his proposal. The one response that the Ukrainian government has is F you. They flip the middle bird and that's it. Where you look at the Russians, like I said, I got to give it to them. Whether, like, I'm not saying that, like, they're angels or anything, but they are at least direct with you. They tell you the facts, they're substantive, they tell you the situation. But, like I said, it feels like we're dealing with adults and children. And with these people, like I said, I don't wish harm upon anyone because we're going to go into a really rough winter. But here's the thing, if I point out the facts and you just still choose to be ignorant, I can't feel sorry for you when it hits because like I said, these people, what it's like what Yuri Bezimov said. and he was a former agent within the KGB. He said one of the things that they do in the intelligence community is demoralization. And they're not going to know what's going to hit them until it comes to their front door. You could show them all the evidence, you could spout all the facts, but then, they're not going to know until it actually hits them at their front door. Sorry, enough of my tangent, but I just thought I'd get that across.
I'll just add one thing to it.
Sure thing, sure.
I, let's go back to World War II. I wasn't alive then, but I've read plenty of histories, and my heart goes out to the majority of the German people, especially those who were subjected to strategic air campaign, the bombing campaign. Their cities were blown up. They died. They suffered, and I have sympathy for them. But I don't have sympathy for the SS.
Yep.
I don't have sympathy for the Nazi insiders. And every time a bomb hit that killed an SS man or an SS woman or a Nazi sympathizer or somebody who was actively involved in the perpetration of those crimes, there's no sympathy. So, this winter is coming and there will be suffering. Many of the people who will suffer, I have sympathy for, but there's a whole bunch of them I don't. And I hope this is a long, cold winter, and I hope it's hell on earth for them. And I hope it helps bring about the changes necessary to eradicate their vile ideology from the world. And the Bandera ideology must be eradicated. I hope there's one day that not only is it defeated on Ukrainian soil, but that his memory is erased. His body is exhumed. It's burned. His ashes scattered. Every statue blown up. Every street renamed. Every memorial anywhere in the world, whether it's in the United States, Canada, or elsewhere, is taken down. And the people who support him and supported him treated like the criminal element they are.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Like I said, Ukrainian heritage right here. It's been very difficult to even talk out about, because my personal Ukrainian hero for me is at least Nestor Makhno. Of course, you know about, who fought against the Bolsheviks and the Whites, and but of course was killed by Trotsky. I could go over about that, but that's for another time. But the main point is, you don't hear any books about him. Well, why? Oh yeah, because Stefan Bandera collaborated with the Nazis, and we know even from CIA documents he was Hitler's spy, the whole 9 yards, and Scott explained the rest. But that makes me want to transition into, like I said, very personal.
But Makhno was an anarchist.
Yes,
you're flying the black flag of anarchy.
No, shame on you. I'm an anti-capitalist. I know. But that's actually why I thought he was badass. But like I said, we'll talk about it another time. That would be one hell of a stream. Just me and you just going over history and go like, yeah, this guy was great. Oh, but this guy, oh, who knows? Maybe in the future. But in all seriousness, this next, though, it kind of somewhat related to what we just talked about previously there. This is kind of a personal preface. I went to school with a lot of Serbs, and a lot of them were refugees of the Yugoslav wars. Specifically, one I befriended, he was like a Tito nostalgist. He actually called himself a Leninist. We disagreed on a lot of things, but he told me a lot about what Yugoslavia was. Because when I was about like 15 or so, I, of course, thought yeah, we need to go into Libya. Gaddafi's a dictator. All that stuff, you can imagine that's haunting me right now. But the point is, when I sat down and talked with him, and he told me about the Yugoslav wars, because I remember this one story he told me. He was watching TV because it was his means of escape, because they were doing no-fly zones over Bosnia. And he remembered this one time when this chunk of concrete the size of a baseball bat pierced through his window and hit his TV. And no, he had no more means to escape, and it was war 24/7. After that. But there was other, like I said, students I befriended who told me terrible stories with their parents and stuff, being in refugee camps, so forth and so forth. And the one thing I learned, though, from my friend Nicola, that was his name, but the story I just told you, he was telling me about the Ustasha, and he told me about Tujman. And so my question is that when I see Ukraine, it feels like the same exact script in regards to that the Croatians Like both sides, like you said once before, Scott, and this is perfectly said, war brings out the worst out of everybody. It does. But the one thing that I've seen is that the Croatians, like the Ukrainians right now, are treated like they were treated like angelic freedom fighters, but they don't want to talk about the Ustasha nostalgia and the fact that Tujman named numerous streets after like these heroes within the World War II, and not to mention that even Hitler said that with what the Ustasha did was taking things a little bit too far, and if they're taking things a bit too far, that's saying something. But my point is that like you even get the same thing with the Serbs and Milenovic is like yeah, the Chetnik nostalgists, not like the original Chetniks, like the later day Chetniks, some of them working with the Nazis. And it just makes me ask the question with Croatia, Ukraine, and if you really want to go further back, Mussolini being an MI5 agent to quash any like anti-war protests in Italy. It seems that the intelligence community has this affiliation with fascism, and why do they use it as a weapon, as a means to destabilize societies and to destabilize harmony between other cultures?
Um, it, how do you look? There was an interview done recently. John Pilger. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Very, very well-known journalist, Australian, I believe. He interviewed Dwayne Claridge, a former CIA official who ran the Latin America division. And if you know anything about America's history with Latin America, South America, you know the role the CIA played in supporting some of the most vile regimes and these death squads, etc. And he confronted, and Claridge got very, I mean, I have to tell you, Claridge was very honest. First of all, he said, yeah, that's what we do. National security. We'll do whatever it takes for our national security, whatever it takes. We'll support the bad guys. People will die. That's just too bad. Tough luck for you guys that are on the receiving end of that. That's just what we do. Um, and I think that's the attitude that's taken when you get, you know, the intelligence services are the tip of the spear, especially the operational aspect of it. The tip of the spear of defending what certain power brokers call the national security interest. Now, I would say that the United States relationship with Latin America, especially Central America, might have national security interests might have been more defined by you know the various economic interests that were exploiting different industries, agricultural, mineral, et cetera, in the region, that it wasn't the interest of the American people, but of American companies, corporations that were making money. So you have to be careful with that term, national interests. Was it in our national interest to overthrow Mossadegh in Iran in the 1950s, or was it in the interest of the British British oil company and future American oil interests in the region to ensure that the Iranians didn't nationalize their oil? Um, but we have a history of supporting those who will do our bidding in a manner which promotes what we deem to be our national interest. And sadly, that means that we don't care if the Ustash slaughter Serbians, or the Chetnik slaughter Croatians, or the Muslim slaughter Christians, etc. We don't care. We don't care about those deaths. What we care about is the result. And does the result further the national security interests of the nation involved, whether it's England with their MI6, United States with the CIA, Russia with its SVR. I'm not saying the Russians do this, but there's people out there that right now that talk about the role of Wagner in Africa. And does Wagner use means that violate human rights in bringing about a result in the Central African Republic, or in Mali, or now in Burkina Faso, an attempt to do so in Mozambique, Sudan? When you look at the relationships, they're about resources, about gaining access to gold mines and other mines that produce minerals of value. Um, so, the Russians aren't innocent in this as well. They will do that which is necessary to promote an outcome that furthers their national security interests. I would say that the Russians aren't on record as doing as much harm as we've done, but the point is everybody does it. It's just the reality of nations when nations interact with other nations. Um, and the problem is everybody who does this does it without putting on the lens of historical retrospection. They're looking for the immediate moment. They're looking for the immediate outcome that they can turn to their boss and say, we've secured the gold fields. We've secured the pineapple growing. We've secured the sugar cane. We've secured this. We've secured that for the immediate outcome, because that's what they do. They're not thinking strategic. If they were, they'd say, wow, maybe supporting somebody who has slaughtered thousands of women and children, thereby alienating an entire population who's going to remember this murder, this rape of their fellow ethnic, fellow ethnicities, and never forget this. I mean, it's like the Hatfields and McCoys in the United States. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the clanning, the Appalachian families, clans that feuded for decades, killing each other off because of a dispute that dates back. Nobody understands what originally happened. Um, the hatred that comes, between the Croatians and the Serbs is derived from these actions. Some of these actions were carried out on the behest of foreign intelligence services. Some were carried out on their own initiative. But whoever perpetrates crimes of this nature has to understand that these crimes resonate for forever, for decades, for centuries among the populations who are on the receiving end of this. Intelligence services don't care. I wish they did. I wish there was some sort of moral authority that had to go through, who would look at it from the perspective of history and say, this will not look good for us. This is not a good look for us. This is not who we are. This is not what we espouse to be. This is not the image we're trying to project on the world. We can't do this. If you want this outcome, we need to find another way to do this. But that requires diplomacy. And the whole thing about covert intelligence is it's the antithesis of diplomacy. It's what you do when you don't want to go through the rigor of sitting down and negotiating with people, reaching a compromise, because a compromise dilutes the outcome. Intelligence allows you to get the immediacy of everything you want. It's literally the definition of national greed, hubris, narcissism, all wrapped into one. That's what intelligence services who carry out these actions represent. Nothing good, all bad, but we do it in the name of national security. But again, national security is not derived from an understanding reached by the population. The American people didn't get a chance to vote on what's going on in Iran, in South America, elsewhere. We never got the vote because it's done in secrecy behind closed doors by committees we don't even get to know the names of, participants we didn't elect to be there. They are making these decisions on our behalf, and we're going to be scarred by the results of what they've done forever. My daughters will be scarred by what we did in Iraq. They had nothing to do with it, but because they're American citizens, they're going to be scarred by that. They're going to be scarred by what we did in Afghanistan. They're going to be scarred by what we're doing in Ukraine today. And that's just the sad reality. So, yeah, it comes down to national interest, national security interest, but it's not national interest. It's the interests of a political and economic elite who have taken upon themselves to be the masters of the universe. Mm-hmm. And history will judge them harshly.
Yeah. It's funny, like I'll make this very brief because then I want to get into like our final questions and then we'll wrap this up. But this has been fantastic, Scott. Thank you so much. It's weird because you were talking about like, they care more about the greed and like achieving their goals, the national interests, instead of actually doing the morally right thing and the legacy and effect that will have, or infamous legacy and effect that will have on history going down the road. it reminded me because I came across a clip. I sadly don't have it with me right now, but I saw the clip when you were testifying, and Biden was there, and he was saying like, "Hey, you know what? We have Scott Ritter over here, but guess what? The other guys there, like, this may be below your pay grade." You remember that, right?
Oh, I remember that very
Yeah.
well.
What was
Scotty Boy once in.
yeah, no, it just reminded me when you were talking about that. But yeah, I was like, the embodiment of doing the right thing and serving. And then there's the embodiment of the DC establishment right there, who just cares
Well,
about their
here
paychecks. Yeah, yeah,
let me add some background that the average person's not aware
sure
of.
thing.
When you turn on the TV, when you look at that video clip, it's me arrayed against the joint committees of the Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committee. I'll say one thing: that's the first time in history they met in joint session. That's how important this hearing was. I'll tell you another thing: the Democrats did everything they could to stop this hearing from taking place. So much so that Trent Lott, who was at the time the Senate Majority Leader, had to use a unique parliamentary procedure where he shut down the Senate, then reconvened the Senate so I could be brought in to do this. That's how important this hearing was. This hearing was supposed to involve me, Madeleine Albright, and Cohen, the Secretary of Defense. Um, and we were going to discuss these issues. So right off the bat, what's that tell you? If I'm going to be on the panel with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, I may not have the paycheck they have, but the information I had was put on par with them. So Biden was just smoking dope at the moment. He knew this. What happened is Albright and Cohen bailed. Why? Because we were talking about things that they knew I would be able to directly contradict at that moment their testimony. Why would I be able to do that if I'm such a low level minion? If I'm just this guy, Scotty Boy, who wants to get in? Because I was at all the meetings. I was not a low level minion. I was a player. I was there. I knew the backstories of everything. I knew that Madeleine Albright had signed off on everything we did. I know the phone calls she made. I know who she talked to, when she talked to, and I know what she said. I know the same thing about the Secretary of Defense. So when they would sit there and say, well, no, 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 I'd say, no, on August 31st at 7:33 p.m., you received a phone call from Richard Butler. Is that not correct? And she can't deny it because the documents are there. And next thing you know, she's going to be confronted with a lie. So she withdrew. Cohen withdrew. Biden was trying to shut the proceedings down because he didn't want me to testify, because he knew that everything I was saying was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. That's the backstory. So Biden's job there was to carry out a political assassination. His job was to minimize the importance of my testimony. And he fumbled it, as Biden fumbles everything he does. He did it so badly that people reacted to his belittlement of me, not because they knew the truth, that I actually knew what I was talking about, that I was there, that this wasn't a matter of me wanting to do something that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense didn't know anything about. They approved everything I did. They approved everything I did, to include not what I was going to do, but what the projected outcome would be. There was no secrets to them. So it was their malice, their malign behavior, their refusal to live up to an obligation that was freely given to me based upon detailed coordination with them, that I was bringing to light. Biden's job was to shut that down. But it was so bad that he received so much bad press that I actually went back and had an hour-long meeting, one-on-one, in his office, where he all but apologized for what he said. And then he wrote me this nice letter that talked about how it was really good to have that conversation and we should talk again. We never talked again. But you know, when you look at that video, you get an impression. Yes, you get of a pompous ass talking down to hopefully what appeared to be a man of integrity and honor. But there's so much more to that story than just meets the eye with that one clip.
Well, what I can tell you right now is that you went from Scotty Boy to Scott Ritter, and he went from Biden to Brandon. So I think you're doing all right for yourself. Um, but yeah, no. So to get back to the war, but that was fantastic. I can't wait to clip that out and actually add the clip for context so we can get it all together. Um, This comes from actually, I got two fan questions because I asked my fans, like, do you have any questions for Scott? The first one was, he's actually in the chat right now. He goes by the Russian. And he asked a really good question. And I thought, I wanted to ask this, but I didn't know how to. So what he basically says, like, look, let's be real. The Russians have pretty much won this war, like, and everything goes swift. We don't have any catastrophe, Armageddon, the whole 9 yards, whatever. Um, if Russia wins, what's going to happen to everyone else? Like, everything's peaceful, safe and sound. Like, where does it go after this war ends?
Well, the critical aspect of that question is, what does Russia view winning to be? They've said over and over again that all of the objectives established by the special military operation are in play and will be accomplished. So that means demilitarization, denazification. These are big. These are big concepts. Demilitarization originally was that Russia was going to get rid of all the NATO influence on the Ukrainian military. But now the Ukrainian is a de facto proxy of NATO, means the entire Ukrainian military must be eliminated, either on the field of battle or through demobilization. You can't get that kind of demobilization unless you have total victory. So we're setting the bar very high right now. Denazification means the total eradication of the Bandera related ideology. You're not going to get that unless you occupy Western Ukraine and you carry out a denazification type program, unless you have control of Kiev and can dissolve the current government, replace it with another, including a parliament that will redo the Ukrainian constitution to remove not only reference to the need to join NATO, but also outlaw the Bandera ideology, to blow up these statues, to erase him, to remove him as a national hero, to de-heroize him, I guess. That's a very high bar. And this has to be done in a way that doesn't threaten NATO to the extent that they will be unwilling to engage with Russia for what is truly the ultimate objective here, which is, go back to December of 2021, in the December 17th, when Russia provided draft treaties to NATO and the United States about their desire for a new European security framework. That's really what's at stake here. Ukraine is part of that grand strategy. And to achieve that grand strategy, Russia has to be able to sit down with the United States, Europe, and NATO in a forum where that outcome is a possibility. And you can't do that if you've totally alienated, if NATO fears you and things of that nature. So we've got these grand objectives. The manner in which Russia achieves this victory plays an important part in the outcome. And that's why I say that what Russia's doing right now is more akin to, let's say, I'm in Las Vegas and I want to drop the old Dunes Hotel or the Sands Hotel, big building in downtown Las Vegas. I could bring in F-16 bombers and just drop bombs on it, and blow it up to hell, but destroy the neighborhood in the process, and everybody would be really irritated with me. But that would be quick. It'd be over quick. Or I can come in with a team of structural engineers who come in and place explosives very properly in very precise manner. So at the time and place of their choosing, they drop the building down with minimal impact on the neighborhood. It takes longer, but the outcome is better. And I think what Russia's looking at right now as it carries out this campaign to achieve these big goals that have been that have been stated that they're going to accomplish. And I'm assuming they're telling the truth, because nothing I'm saying right now has any relevance if Russia's willing to ratchet that down, dilute it. I don't think they are. They've been consistent. So they're doing that. So this is going to take time as they very precisely maneuver, position themselves to achieve outcomes. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself on the political front. You don't want to get too far ahead on the military front. If you achieve a military victory without a political solution, you've got a problem. If you achieve a political solution without a military victory, you've got a problem. So you've got to do all this in order, manage NATO properly, manage Europe properly. NATO and Europe are going to become more manageable once winter comes in, especially Europe. I mean, Liz Truss just resigned today. The British government's in free fall. The
Woohoo!
Italian government just flopped. The German government's in danger. Macron's under siege. We can go on and on and on. Revolutionary change is in the process, not because of any Karl Marx ideology that was brewing in Europe, but because of the economic consequences of the policy of sanctioning Russian energy without a viable plan B. The United States is losing influence. The Swedes have all but acknowledged, they said, we finished doing a complete investigation of the Nord Stream 1 attack. We know who did it, but we've sealed the files. We're not talking about it because to talk about it would harm our national security. Remember that national security interest thing. Why? Russia, calling out Russia. We would love to be able to call out Russia. They can't call out the United States, though, because the United States is the one who carried out that attack. The Germans don't want to have anything to do with this investigation. They too know exactly who did it, but they don't want to know it. They're literally the monkey, don't want to hear, don't want to see, don't want to speak, nothing. They are walking away mute because they know the United States attacked them. The United States declared war on Europe. Europe's waking up to this reality that the root cause of all their problems that they're facing this winter is from America, not from Russia. From America, not Russia. One more time, from America, not Russia. And so that's a reality that Russia needs to exploit to its advantage. So what Russia doesn't want to do is move too violently or too rapidly on the military and or domestic political front in Ukraine in a way that alters this ultimate outcome, which is a Europe that's going to strip away its political and its economic elite. No more Liz Truss talking about pushing nuclear buttons against Russia. No more. She's gone. Finished. Who knows what her predecessor would do, but we know that Liz Truss is gone. No more, I will back Ukraine forever. She's gone. Finished. Why? Because he can't deal with the horrific economic consequences of the policy that Boris Johnson gave her. And now whoever replaces her is looking, saying, Johnson's gone, Truss didn't last very long. I might be the shortest prime minister tenure in history. If I continue this policy, what do I need to change so that I survive politically? Because a politician's sole job in this life is to survive politically. You don't enter politics to do the right thing. You enter politics to get reelected, to become part of the political elite, and hopefully transition like Tony Blair did into the economic elite, where you're out there meeting in Davos, meeting everywhere, pulling the economic strings without any care whatsoever about the people in the country that you're supposed to represent. Politicians don't care about the people. Well, the people every once in a while get to manifest their desires in things called elections. And when you live in a democracy like the United Kingdom, and you enact policies that devastate the entire spectrum of society economically, those policies have to change. And one of the root causes of this economic policy is the sanctioning of Russian energy. Let's see what the next prime minister does. I bet that it won't be that rapid a transition, and he or she is gone. And eventually you're going to get a prime minister who says, wow, I'd like to stay in power. And you know what else might happen? We might actually trigger one of these unique moments in history where the crown, everybody's like, well, it's a constitutional monarchy. The crown is not allowed. The crown's allowed to dissolve parliament anytime it wants. And if you keep dumping prime ministers, King Charles III may very well say, enough of this crap. I'm done. I'm dissolving parliament. We're starting over with a clean slate and let the people elect people to represent them who are going to have a stable policy and can stay in power for longer than a week. So we might see something like that happen. That's revolutionary. So this is where we're at right now. The Russians know this is happening. They're going to manage that because their larger objective goes beyond demilitarization, denazification. All those are big things. It goes beyond Ukraine being neutral in perpetuity. It goes into a new European security framework. So the Russians are going to manage this. This is going to take time. There's a lot of people out there who are impatient for a Russian victory. But Russian victory is more than just killing Ukrainians on the field of battle. And indeed, as General Armageddon said, he would actually like to pursue this in a way that reduced the amount of deaths amongst the Ukrainians. He views them as his brothers. And that's something the West just doesn't quite grasp anymore, that there is a deep feeling of sadness and sorrow and even resentment on the part of the Russians that they're being called upon to kill their Ukrainian brothers and sisters. Because you have a Ukrainian background. You scratch a Ukrainian, you got some Russian. You scratch a Russian, you got a Ukrainian. These people have been intermingling for centuries, and
You could say
they've
the
been.
same exact thing about Serbs and Croatians.
Yeah. So we're in a situation now where I think the Russian leadership is far more mature and has far greater patience than people give them credit for, and people in the West will acknowledge. I think this conflict, I think the inevitability of Russian victory is there, but to achieve every objective that the Russians want, this war is going to have to be conducted in a very measured way. Anybody who's looking for the big fist to run up and take Kiev and end it, I don't think so. I think you're going to be seeing a much more measured approach so that everything's timed to come together at the same time. And that's the sign of a true strategic genius. And I think the Russians possess a true strategic genius in the form of their president. I'm not here to kiss Putin's what. I'm just here stating a fact that this guy has a vision and he has the maturity to carry out this vision in a manner which will accomplish that. He's not Joe Biden, who just runs off the mouth at every chance he gets. He's not Macron, who panics. He's not Stoltenberg, who panics. He's not Liz Truss, who can't hold a job. He's not Schultz, who doesn't know what he wants. He's none of these European leaders or Canadian leaders. He's not Trudeau. He's Putin. He's been around a lot longer than any of them, and there's a reason why. And he'll be around a lot longer than any of them, and there's a reason why. And the reason is he's a damn good leader.
Exactly, and I'm still glad a last stream that you kind of schooled me and told me a lot more about who Putin really was. Hopefully, for another time, we can do like a really extended amount in that regard. But yeah, because the one thing, like as I said before, was like a lot of every country in the world has corruption. We're not going to deny that. But if you look at the 90s with Russia and you look at when Putin comes in, basically he has to clean up this whole mess. To call it a mess would be an understatement. He comes around, and he gives a sense of not just integrity, like not just a sense of life to Russia, but integrity, pride, hope. Like, and it's funny how like we have all these progressive politicians like AOC, the Squad. They all talk about housing as a human right. You know what country has housing as a human right? Russia. It's in their constitution. People don't talk like that. Yes, you'll probably get a shack. It's not a mansion. But you don't get that in Canada. You don't get the United States. You don't get in the UK. And it's funny, like even recently, I think you saw that video going about with AOC being confronted at the town hall, right? And her response, yeah, and in response, she said in like I think like a Facebook or Instagram story, like, "Oh well, they're Trumpers and LaRouchites." Well, first of all, I'm not a Trump supporter. I used to be back in the day, but I'm not fond of Trump completely. But I respect people in my chat who are Trumpers or LaRouchites, and I think LaRouche in certain cases he's a little weird. But that doesn't dismiss the fact that everything that Jose said towards him was justified. And what does she say throughout this story? Well, they're repeating pro-Putin talking points. You know why this is very important, why I'm bringing this up? Not because she's an idiot in this regards. Second of all, is the fact that the whole smearing, like, oh, they're unpatriotic, they hate their country, don't listen to them. You know where that roots from? Hermann Goring. He said during the Nuremberg trials that when it came to any anti-war opposition, we would smear them as unpatriotic. So that's the thing. You see this whole line from the West. The whole thing with Russiagate is rooted within that mindset. Of course, I'm not saying Hermann Goring is the one who invented this whole mindset and tactic, but the fact it's still being presented, and it was used by the Nazis and exclusively by fascists, and also learned by Mussolini through MI5 during World War I, note that, it's a continuing cycle. You're in actual endorsement of authoritarianism. Like, you think you're sticking towards authoritarianism, but you're not. So I just wanted to transition on that one point. This, another fan question. And I wanted to ask you this because I didn't know you were going to be there at the rally. You support Assange. And I was curious to know what his case means to you. Very simple.
Well, the first thing I do with Julian Assange is I remove him as a person. Not because I don't like Julian Assange. I don't know Julian Assange.
Of
I've never
course.
met the guy. Anything I know about him, I've read. That means that I would be held hostage to the opinions of others. So I disassociate Julian Assange from the case, and with apologies to his wife and his children, that doesn't mean I'm trying to minimize the absolute human um, tragedy that's taking place with his incarceration. I know what it's like to be incarcerated wrongly. So I know what he's going through, um, and he's been suffering a lot longer than I ever did. But I focus on, you said, what it means to me as a person, and I'm an American, and I'm somebody who took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I take that oath seriously. It's an oath that goes beyond simply wearing a uniform. It's a lifetime oath that every American should aspire to, should adhere to. And one of the fundamental, you know, foundational um, aspects of being an American is the right for freedom of speech and free press. It's specifically spelled out, Article 1, the Bill of Rights. Um, why would our founding fathers emphasize this? Because you can't survive as a democracy unless the people have a right to speak out and hold to account those in higher office, to criticize them, to condemn them if necessary. Free speech doesn't give the government a right to criticize or condemn me. It gives me a right to criticize and condemn them. Um, a free press, likewise, means the press is never held hostage to the desires and will of the government. The press is there to hold the government accountable for its lies, especially lies. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's not about trivial criticism, oh, 55-mile-an-hour speed limit is garbage, and I want to speak out because you're promoting, you won't allow a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's fine. Free speech is implied there. Free speech is, hey, American troops just murdered some Reuters journalists in Iraq, but you're covering it up. Julian Assange found the videotape, published the videotape, exposing the truth to the American people that American soldiers are committing war crimes in Iraq. And the government's trying to cover it up. Free speech is about exposing that right there. And the government doesn't get to hide behind a wall of national security and say, no, we're not going to talk about this because it's national security. There's nothing national security related beyond the embarrassment of being caught out committing a war crime. And embarrassment is not justification for classification or suppression of the story. This is what Julian Assange brought to bear. He exposed the lies of the American government. And when you expose the lie of the American government, you're doing the right thing, because the American government should never lie to its own people. Yes, there are things that can be kept secret, but you can't keep something secret because if to expose it would expose a lie. That's wrong. There has to be total transparency, total honesty, total integrity between the relationship of the government with those whom they govern. Because at the end of the day, this isn't government by the government for the government. This is government by the people for the people of the people. Abraham Lincoln. This is one of those foundational principles. And the people must be empowered with the freedom of speech and the ability to wield a free press, to hold to account those who govern in our name. Because if you eliminate that, we cease to function as democracy. That's why I was there. Because Julian Assange stands for everything that makes freedom of speech valuable, makes freedom of speech worthwhile. And what shamed me was, where were the journalists? Where were the American journalists who were supposed to be the defenders of freedom of speech? Where was the free press? Silent, silent, walking away, ignoring it. Why? Because they're scared. They're scared to exercise that which other journalists before them who were worthy of the name fought for. Go to the Pentagon Papers, talk about the United States versus the New York Times, about this very issue of bringing forth the data that Daniel Ellsberg was bringing out, the Pentagon Papers, which exposed the lies of the government. Read the opinion written by, I believe it was Blackman. Could be wrong on this. But he basically says that it's the duty to expose lies. That's what the free press is about. That's what freedom of speech is about. That's what the Pentagon Papers was about. That's what Julian Assange was about. Whether it was showing the videotape or exposing the diplomatic cables that had humiliated Hillary Clinton, exposure is nothing but a liar. Everything she says is a lie. Everything she did on behalf of the American people as Secretary of State was a lie, apparently, because she would say one thing to the public, one thing to Congress, and another thing in the cables. They wanted to keep the cables classified because to expose them wouldn't put anybody's life at risk. It would embarrass Hillary Clinton. Hey, it's the job of the press to embarrass Hillary Clinton. Anybody else who is honored and given the privilege of representing the American people and that despoils that by lying to the American people about that which they are doing allegedly on behalf of the American people. That's why I was at the Assange rally.
Well, what I could definitely tell you, I remember where I was when that video came in. Specifically, the Reuters journalists who got massacred, and those within the helicopter. I think I was 12, and I remember my mom got really like, son, you shouldn't be watching this, and I was like, you know what? Actually, at my age, I think it was the right time to know about what was really going on in the world. And with Julian, like I followed him pretty much right from the beginning. Well, I know WikiLeaks has been around before that, but I consider that the real beginning. And actually, fun fact, he, like me, he suffers from autism spectrum disorder. So to know somebody like him and with what he has dealt with a lot of his life and to overcome, to do the right thing, very inspiring in regards. I carry a Free Assange sticker on my guitar everywhere I go, and I hope at least in my lifetime we'll get to see him live, and also he gets to see his beautiful children, because I hate this. Just even the thought of that really breaks my heart. The fact that they didn't barely get to even see their father. But free Julian. Can we get some hashtag free Julian in the chat, please? I guess now to end it on a coda, because we got 6 more. We got 6 more minutes here, Scott.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Because I'm sorry to say this, I see a lot of you guys in the chat who are asking multiple questions, but as I said before, I should do it actually for a few days, asking you, submitting questions, and I pick the ones. But we're on, like I said, time constraint. We're in the last 5 minutes. So I want to end it with this point, because I saw your interview with Anya, and I saw towards the end, and you did a really class act of a thing, and is that you decided to ask her the question saying, you sound a bit sad. Do you want me to, give you a little bit of hope in this regards? And which, like I said, that was a really great thing of you to do, really uptight and very upstanding of you to do so. So I want to ask this question because I'm actually going to share something I haven't said towards my audience even at all. I do this for there's live streams where I go for about 5 to 7 hours because I want to cover this from all angles. I want to cover every story, give my thoughts, put the truth out there, because if I'm in a position where I'm doing this full time, I want to give my 110%. But I'm not going to lie, when I step behind the camera, and Scott, I'm 26. But even at my age, I'm kind of thinking about where I've been at life and where I am. And I think about the whole thing in the world. And just even when I'm kind of in my spare time, because not everything is YouTube, business, whatever. Even when I'm playing a video game or I'm playing my guitar or I'm just going on about just kind of doing my own spare time, I'm kind of thinking to myself, am I on limited time? With everything that's going on in the world, am I really spending my time wisely? Because tomorrow something very drastic could change. And I think with the current situation that we have throughout the world, it's just, I don't know, if we feel hopeless and we feel that there's no way out, or we feel this anxiety across our heads, what's the best way to conquer that? Is basically what I'm saying. You're
talking to a guy who,
who,
I'm dealing with a similar situation. If I were smart,
no,
call me up. If you call me up and say, "Hey, Scott, on Thursday, I want to take 2 hours out of your time and do a podcast," that benefits me not at all. I don't make any money off of this. If I were smart, I'd say, Brian, I respect what you're doing, but I'm going to be a little selfish here, and nah, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to either write and make money for my family, or I'm going to relax. I mean, here, I'll give a little hint. I used to play World of Warcraft. My daughters turned me on to it back in 2008, and I was pretty good at it. Yeah, I don't get to do that anymore. I don't get to do anything anymore because every time somebody like you calls me up and says, "Hey, I'm really concerned about the current situation. I'd like to talk to you about it," I say, "Okay, let's talk." Because I mean, what else can I do? I mean, you can't be a good citizen. You can't be a good anything if you turn your back on people who are simply trying to empower themselves with knowledge and information through the time-tested mechanism of discussion, dialogue, debate. So yeah, I do all this, but it burns me the hell out. I mean, my health is suffering, a whole bunch of things going on, and at some point in time, I've got to understand that, you know, the world doesn't revolve around what Scott Ritter thinks and what Scott Ritter says. I think it's useful and I think it's nice, and I'm sort of honored by the fact that people want to hear about it. But let me also put it this way: let's say you think that this is valuable, what we're doing here. But if I exhaust myself to the point that I have a health collapse and I can't do this, then what good is it? What good is it? So you got to find balance, and I think this is what I'm trying to get at: is find balance. You like to play video games? Take time out to play video games. I take time out to walk my dogs twice a day. I mean, and sometimes I'm like, I can't do this. I got this interview coming up. I got to write. I got to do this. It's like, hell no. Take your dogs out for a walk. Get out there in the fresh air. Just unplug for an hour while you walk around in the great expanse of upstate New York. And do that twice a day. I got to start going back to the gym, not because I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger wannabe, but exercise is just a good way to get away from this. Plus, it helps me not look so chubby next time you see me on a Julian Assange video. But
Oh,
the
no,
point is,
like, dude, you could fold me into a pretzel and put me in a suitcase compared to me, okay? So don't be too hard
but
on
my
yourself.
my point is that we got to find that balance because
Mhm.
this issue doesn't define who you are and what you are. This
Yeah.
issue is not going to be your future. You say you're 26. Okay, I'm 61. When I was 26, gosh, where was I? 26. I was in the Marine Corps. I was in 29 Palms, California, and I was wrapped up in everything that the Marine Corps. And trust me, I came home from my work, and I mean, it was the most important thing in the world to me. I was a fanatic about, learning to kill the Russians because that's what I was doing in 1986. And all that. But look at me today. Those days are in the past. I somehow managed to live for another 35 years, and hopefully I can live a little bit longer. My point is, this too shall pass. One of these days, this war is going to end, and when it does, Brighton and Scott need to be in a position where we can move on and enjoy our lives, where we haven't poured so much into this that we've made it impossible for us to enjoy it. And the other thing is, life is about quality moments, and so you got to make quality moments. And I know this is important to you. I respect the fact that you do this, and that's why I'm here. But this isn't a quality moment. I mean, you're doing quality work. This isn't a quality moment. The quality
Of
moment is time you
course.
can spend with your parents, your friends, with yourself, with your dogs, your cats. Those are the quality moments that make life worth living. Um, and so, for anybody listening to this, don't do what I'm doing and don't do what you're probably doing, which is burning yourself out at both ends of the candle. Take a pause for the cause, and the cause is you. And do what you need to do to bring balance to your life. Do that which brings you joy, brings you joy. Um, and that doesn't mean that you divorce yourself from reality. No, but it just means that when you finally do plug back into this horrible reality that we live in, that you're able to more focus on this problem because you're coming from a good place, not a bad place. Doing this interview, if I approach it, which I'll tell you the respect I show you, I got a solid 6 hours of sleep last night. I don't normally get that, but I was like, nah, if I'm going to go on air for 2 hours, I better be articulate and coherent, at least pretend to be. But you have to take these things seriously. If you're going to be serious about the current situation, then you need to be serious about making sure that you are physically and mentally and emotionally capable of doing it right. Because if you come in tired, hungry, confused, disturbed, whatever, you're not doing it right. You're doing it wrong, and therefore you're not even, succeeding in the objective of trying to be plugged in. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, that
that's
was absolutely incredible.
absolutely
Oh my
incredible.
God. Sorry, I just heard all the feedback in the back there. But no, that was absolutely incredible. And I saw people in the chat are just saying, like, this is incredible wisdom. And this is actually, I think this kind of ends where it kind of began because I said, is there no turning back? What do we do? And now I end it with, like, well, here's what you should do in this moment. Focus on the things that value to you in this moment. Of course, like, what we're doing is great, and this is why we're here. But like I said, don't be too distracted by what is going on in the world. You should pay attention, but don't let it consume you and put too much anxiety on your head, because we're only here for a small amount of time. And the reason why I'm also very conscientious of my time personally, and I have a very unique moment, is that across my stomach, I have a scar. When I was 4 months old, I stage 4 Wilms tumor. I had cancer. 4 months old. I had a 50-50 shot of surviving. Sorry to spoil the story, but I survived. But no, but seriously, well, Scott, are you religious or anything, if I may ask? I hope this is not too personal. Well, the main point is,
Let me put it this way: I believe in a higher power. I
there
don't
we
know how to
go.
define it.
That's
I don't
good.
know how to define that higher power. I'm not a fan of organized religion because too many people have died in the name of organized religion. But
Same
I
here.
do believe that we're put on this earth for a reason.
Hmm. So yeah, no, that's exactly the same as me. And I'll tell you right now, after that happened to me when I was, very young, it makes me think like I'm here for a really strong reason. And actually, I think I have a lot of instilled moral behavior because of that. Even if I don't remember it or anything like that, it's just like, there's a lot of people who were abused growing up, but they don't remember being abused. But of course, it affects them down the road. What makes you say it can't be the opposite way? And with me, though, it's just like, this is why I'm committed to reading everything, checking everything, come to my conclusions, point out the facts. Of course, give a little bit of my opinion because we need that bridge in between, the facts and, subjective opinion, and just do the right thing. That's how what everybody here who's listening to this should be doing. Now, what you do with doing the right thing, of course, that's your decision, it's your life. I don't know you. It all depends on each individual. But what Scott is, and this is what I said in my intro, he is one of the best embodiments of doing the right thing. And the people who come on this channel, um, if they embody that quality, I'll bring them on, but that's why he was here. So I want to say thank you so much, Scott. This was an absolute dynamite blast, and thank you for doing the right thing. Honestly, you could do a 3-hour podcast explaining how the Teletubbies did 9/11, and we would all be listening to it. So that's
So would
how.
I.
So I want to thank you so much, though, in all seriousness, for doing the right thing, and hope to have you back because, like you see, the chat, it's loaded with more questions. But thank you very much for your service. Thank you for very much what you're doing right now. And, the battle rages on, but of course, I think we'll come out on top, spiritually speaking, in terms of the truth coming out because lies are temporary. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for having me.